So, I've been dating Ben for about 8 months now, and overall, things have been pretty great. But there's one thing that's been bothering him, and honestly, it started to bother me too, though not for the same reasons. You see, Ben and I come from different financial backgrounds. I'm not wealthy or anything, but I've grown up in a pretty comfortable environment. I can go out to dinner with friends or pick up the tab here and there without stressing too much about it. Ben, on the other hand, grew up in a more modest household. He works hard, and he makes enough to cover his expenses, but he doesn't have the same level of financial ease. And that's where things sometimes get complicated. Ben's always been a gentleman at heart, which I love about him. He holds doors open, offers his jacket when it's cold, insists on walking me to my car if we're out late. You get the idea. He's also got this really old school view that the man should be the one paying when we're out on dates, or at least offering to. In the beginning, it was sweet. I could tell he wanted to take care of me in his own way, and I appreciated the effort. But as time went on, I started to notice that it was stressing him out. He would insist on paying for dinner, and I could see him quietly calculating if he could afford it afterward, or he tried to surprise me with little gifts that, while thoughtful, I knew were a bit of a stretch for him financially. I've told him so many times that I don't care about that kind of stuff. I'm not the kind of person who needs to be wined and dined or showered with expensive presents. I've always been independent, and I value the person I'm with more for their personality and how they treat me than what they can spend on me. But even though I've reassured him about this more times than I can count, the topic keeps creeping back into our relationship. It's not all the time, but every now and then, something will trigger it, whether it's a conversation we're having or a situation we find ourselves in, and I can see Ben retreat into this feeling of inadequacy, like he's not measuring up. I don't know if it's just the way he was raised or society's expectations weighing on him, but it's there, lingering in the background. Anyway, last night, we had dinner plans with a group of my friends, 6 of them, to be exact. There were 8 of us total, me, Ben, and then 6 of my closest friends, 3 women and 3 men. It wasn't a fancy dinner, just a casual evening out at one of our favorite restaurants. We all know the staff there, and it's the kind of place we go to when we just want to hang out, laugh, and catch up without worrying about putting on airs. The dinner itself was great. Everyone was in high spirits, the conversation flowed, and we were all joking around like we always do. The food was fantastic, as usual, and the drinks were flowing. I could tell Ben was a little quiet during the meal, but that's not unusual for him when he's around my friends. He gets along with them just fine, but sometimes I can tell he feels a bit like an outsider. Most of my friends are doing well for themselves. They have decent jobs, and financially, they're all in a pretty comfortable place. Ben, I think, sometimes feels like he's on the outside looking in, even though no one ever treats him that way. So, the evening was wrapping up, and then, as usual, the bill came. Now, in this friend group, the guys, specifically 2 of them, Max and Harry, usually take it upon themselves to cover the bill when we're all out. It's just this unspoken thing that's developed over the years. It's not a big deal to anyone. The guys aren't trying to show off, and we're all friends, so it's just something they do. Sometimes we chip in, sometimes we don't. It's never been a source of tension or drama. But when Max and Harry offered to pay this time, I noticed Ben stiffen beside me. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel his discomfort. After a few moments, he leaned over and whispered, "I don't feel comfortable with them paying for my dinner. Can we chip in?" At first, I thought, okay, no big deal. I respect that. If he wants to contribute, that's totally fine. But then Ben added, "Could you chip in and pay for my share, and I'll pay you back later? I just don't want them to know you're covering me." That's when the whole thing started to feel off. I sat there for a second, trying to wrap my head around what he was asking. He didn't want my friends to know that I was covering his share. That struck me as completely absurd. First of all, it wasn't a big deal in the first place. My friends wouldn't have cared if I paid for both of us or if neither of us chipped in. But more importantly, it felt like Ben was trying to turn this into some weird competition, like he couldn't stand the thought of my guy friends paying for something he was a part of. I didn't want to make a scene, so I whispered back, "Ben, I'll just pay my share. It's not a big deal." But he wasn't satisfied with that. He kept insisting that I pay for his share, but in a way that would make it look like he was contributing. I couldn't believe it. It felt so unnecessary and, frankly, a little immature. I know money is a sensitive issue for him, but this felt like it was about more than just the bill. It felt like Ben was trying to prove something to my friends, to himself. I'm not even sure who. And honestly, it felt like it was turning into some kind of ego battle, which was the last thing I wanted. Finally, I'd had enough. I turned to the group and said, "I'll chip in a third of the bill." No one blinked. No one cared. We split it, and the evening moved on. Except Ben was clearly sulking now. He barely said a word for the rest of the night. And when we left, he was walking a few steps behind me, clearly upset. As soon as we got home, he blew up. He told me I'd emasculated him in front of my friends, made him look bad, and undermined him by not letting him save face. He said that by me paying in front of everyone, I'd embarrassed him and made it seem like he couldn't handle his own expenses. He went on about how it's important for him to feel like he can take care of me, even if it's just in little ways, and that I'd taken that away from him by not letting him pay the way he wanted. At this point, I was just exhausted. I couldn't believe we were having this argument over something as small as who paid for dinner. I told him he was overreacting, that none of my friends cared who paid, and that I didn't see why he was so fixated on this whole idea of saving face. It seemed to me like he was letting his pride get in the way of enjoying the night, and I honestly didn't understand why it was such a big deal to him. I thought he was blowing the whole thing out of proportion, but he was convinced that I'd made him look bad, and nothing I said was going to change his mind. Now, I'm left feeling conflicted. Was I wrong for not handling it the way he wanted? Should I have gone along with his plan to pretend he was paying? It felt ridiculous to me, but I don't know if I'm missing something. I feel like this isn't just about dinner, it's about something deeper in our relationship. Like our financial differences are creating this gap between us that's only going to get wider if we don't address it. But at the same time, I don't think I should have to tiptoe around his insecurities or lie to my friends just to protect his ego. So after that whole dinner debacle, things between Ben and me didn't exactly smooth over. He was still a bit distant, but we were talking, albeit carefully, as if we were both trying not to bring up the elephant in the room. I could tell the situation still weighed heavily on him, even though I tried to move on. Every so often, I'd catch him staring off, as if he were replaying that moment in his head, and I knew he was still feeling embarrassed. I gave him space and didn't press it. A couple of days later, my friends invited me out again, this time just for a casual hangout at another restaurant we all liked. The invite came through the group chat, and they were all their usual, fun selves, planning and tossing around food recommendations and making jokes about how much we'd order. It sounded like a nice way to unwind after the tension with Ben. I was looking forward to it, just a relaxing night out with good food and conversation. I mentioned to them that I'd be bringing Ben along, mostly because I thought it might help bridge whatever gap had opened between us after the last dinner. My friends didn't mind at all, but a few of the girls mentioned they were coming without their boyfriends, so it would mostly just be us. Ben had been a little wary about coming, but I reassured him it would be more laid back this time, fewer people, less pressure. I could tell he wasn't super excited, but he agreed to come anyway, probably figuring it was better than sitting at home stewing over the last time we all went out. So the night came, and we got to the restaurant a little after the others. When we walked in, most of my friends were already there laughing, chatting, and just generally in a good mood. There was only one other guy at the table, one of the girls' brothers, who was visiting for the weekend, so it was mostly just a group of girls, and then Ben. I could feel him tense up a bit when he saw the dynamic, but I nudged him to sit down, reminding him that this was a chill night. We all started ordering, and things were going fine. The food was delicious as usual, and the conversation was lighthearted, mostly catching up on everyone's week and sharing funny stories. I was having a good time and thought Ben was settling into the evening too, even though he wasn't talking much. My friends were nice enough to ask him a few questions here and there, nothing too intrusive, just the usual, "How's work going? And what have you two been up to?" The kind of small talk that's easy to answer. But then the ordering kept going. If you know my friends, they love to eat, and they love to eat well. We're not the type to just get a main course and be done with it. No, there are appetizers, then mains, then drinks, then maybe a round of dessert or some more cocktails after. We love to indulge when we're together, and tonight was no different. Everyone kept ordering more extra sides, another round of drinks, you name it. I could feel Ben getting a bit more uncomfortable as the night went on. I glanced over at him a couple of times, and he had that look he gets when he's quietly calculating the cost of things. It's subtle, but I know him well enough by now to pick up on it. But I didn't think too much of it at first because I figured we'd just split the bill like we normally do, and everyone would pay for their own share. No big deal. Then, as the night wound down and the waiter brought over the bill, the inevitable conversation about splitting it came up. One of my friends casually suggested, let's just split it evenly, which is usually how we do it when the ordering's been all over the place. Everyone agreed it just made sense with how much food and drinks we'd shared. But I could tell immediately that Ben wasn't okay with this. He leaned over and whispered to me, clearly uncomfortable, that he didn't have enough money to cover an even split. He'd brought just enough cash to cover what he and I had eaten individually, maybe a little extra, but splitting the bill equally would mean he'd have to come up with more than what he had. He quietly asked if I could spot him the difference because he didn't want to look bad in front of my friends, especially after what happened last time. Honestly, in that moment, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I totally understood where he was coming from. The bill had piled up fast, and we were with a group of people who are comfortable enough not to worry about it. But on the other hand, it felt like we were right back where we started, Ben feeling ashamed or insecure about not being able to keep up, and me trying to balance respecting his pride with the practicality of just paying the bill. So, I sighed and said, "Are you back to this again?" I didn't mean it in a mean way, but I think he took it harder than I intended. I reached into my bag and paid for both of us his portion and mine because I didn't want to make a scene or draw attention to the situation. No one at the table even noticed. They were all chatting and finishing up their drinks, and the bill was settled without any fuss. But Ben was quiet for the rest of the evening, and I could tell that once again he felt embarrassed or emasculated, even though I had tried to make it as low-key as possible. When we got home, it was clear that the issue was far from over. Ben was clearly stewing, and after a few minutes of awkward silence, he finally said that he didn't feel comfortable in front of my friends. He admitted that it bothered him, having to rely on me to cover his portion, and that he felt like he'd looked bad in front of everyone again. He hated the idea that my friends might see him as someone who couldn't handle his own bills or couldn't keep up with the group. I tried to reassure him, just like I had before. I told him that no one cared about who paid for what, and that my friends weren't judging him for any of it. But honestly, at this point, I was starting to get frustrated. It felt like every time we went out with friends, this same issue would rear its head, and I was always left trying to smooth things over. I told him not to overthink it, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He just gave me this look, like he was stuck in his own head, reliving the embarrassment over and over again. After that awkward dinner with my friends, things between Ben and me were still tense. It was like this invisible wall had been built up between us, and no matter how much I tried to reassure him, he just couldn't get past his own insecurities. I didn't want to keep having the same argument over and over again, but it seemed like every time we went out, the issue would find its way back into our relationship. It wasn't even about money. Really, it felt like it went deeper than that, like Ben was constantly measuring himself against some invisible standard, and every time he came up short in his own mind, he'd spiral into this frustration that I couldn't talk him out of. A few weeks passed, and we hadn't gone out with friends again since that last dinner. Honestly, I was kind of relieved. I thought maybe some space would help him calm down and stop overthinking everything. We were doing better when it was just the two of us staying in, watching movies, cooking together. It felt like the pressure was off when it was just us, and Ben seemed more relaxed. He wasn't carrying around that chip on his shoulder like he did when we were with other people. But then his friends invited him out. They were planning a casual night out at a bar they all liked. Nothing fancy, just drinks and maybe some food. Ben seemed excited about it, and I thought maybe it would be good for him to hang out with his friends, where the dynamic was different. He was more comfortable around them, and they didn't seem to trigger the same insecurities that my friends did. When he asked if I wanted to come along, I hesitated for a second. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea after everything that had happened. But he reassured me it would be fun, just a low-key night, and I figured, why not? Maybe it would help take the edge off all the tension that had been building up between us. So we went. The mood was light, and Ben seemed genuinely happy to be with his friends again. We arrived at the bar, and everyone was in good spirits, laughing and catching up over drinks. His friends are a good group, relaxed, not flashy or overly competitive. They're all used to doing their own thing when it comes to paying for stuff. When we hang out with them, it's always been a case of everyone pays for themselves, so I wasn't worried about any awkwardness or drama this time. The night started off great. Ben was in his element, cracking jokes and talking about sports or whatever else guys talk about. I was sitting there, enjoying the conversation, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel that underlying tension. We ordered a few rounds of drinks, some appetizers to share, and it was nice to see Ben laughing and not worrying about money or how he was being perceived. For a little while, it felt like the old Ben was back, the one who wasn't constantly overthinking everything. But then, when the bill came, everything changed. As the waiter brought it over, Ben quietly took a glance at it, and I noticed the shift in his demeanor almost immediately. His shoulders tensed, and I saw that familiar look cross his face, the one he gets when he's mentally calculating whether or not he can afford the total. He pulled out his phone, likely checking his balance, and after a minute, he leaned over to me and whispered that he was a bit short. He could cover most of his and my share, but not the full amount. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't a big deal to me. But then turned to his friends and, in the same low tone, asked if someone could spot him the difference. He said he'd pay them back later, and I could tell he was trying to keep it casual, but it was clear he wasn't comfortable asking. None of his friends had even responded yet when I decided to step in. I was already tired of this pattern. Every time we went out, it was the same story, him feeling inadequate, me stepping in to cover the difference, and then dealing with the fallout later. So, without missing a beat, I looked at him and said, "What are these jokes about?" It came out sharper than I intended, but I was frustrated. I pulled out my card and told the waiter to put it on my tab, paying for both of us. I didn't want to drag it out or turn it into a thing. I just wanted it over with. But that didn't sit well with Ben. He tried to play it off in front of his friends, casually saying, "Oh, I just gave her money yesterday, so she has more today. That's why she paid." I froze for a second, caught completely off guard by what he'd just said. It wasn't true, he hadn't given me any money. I'd been covering for both of us lately, and I hadn't asked for anything in return. But now he was trying to rewrite the narrative in front of his friends, making it seem like this was some planned thing where he was taking care of me in some way. I didn't know whether to laugh or be angry. I was stunned. It wasn't just the fact that he hadn't given me any money, it was the fact that he felt the need to say it, to save face in front of his friends by pretending like he was still in control of the situation when clearly he wasn't. I let it go for the moment because I didn't want to cause a scene, but I was fuming inside. We finished the night, and Ben was quieter on the way home. I think he knew something was off, but he didn't say anything until we got back to the apartment. That's when it all came pouring out. He was angry. He said I had embarrassed him in front of his friends by paying for both of us, and that I shouldn't have stepped in like that. He was upset that I hadn't let him handle it, even if it meant borrowing money from his friends. He said that by paying, I made him look like he couldn't take care of me, and now his friends might think he wasn't able to pay for my share. It was like we were right back to where we started, except now, it was about his friends instead of mine. I listened to him rant, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him flat out that I didn't care what his friends thought. I wasn't going to sit there and let him make up stories about giving me money when that wasn't true, just to protect his pride. And more than that, I was frustrated that this same issue kept coming up. I told him I wasn't trying to emasculate him or make him feel small, but it wasn't fair to me either. Ben didn't say much after that. He just sat there, staring at the floor, clearly embarrassed, but also angry that I'd called him out. I didn't know what else to say. Ida, I love Ben, but this whole situation has me wondering if our different backgrounds are going to keep causing problems like this. And I'm not sure what to do about it.